محور هذه الجلسة هو الحركات الاجتماعية والمواطنة والثقة السياسية، وأعتقد هذه محاور أساسية في فهم الديناميات الراهنة الآن، وأن هناك مجال أو فضاء عام يتحرك، هناك الفيسبوك، هناك التويتر، هناك المقاهي شبه الافتراضية، هناك نقاش حاد يعني. فأعتقد أن مجتمع الأسفل أو الفئات السفلى في السلم الاجتماعي تتحرك وتفكر وتستلهم رؤى جديدة، سواء بين بعضها البعض أو بمشورة بعض المثقفين، بعض من النخبة الذين يساعدون الآن في بلورة إلى أين نسير. قبل أيام كانت هناك ندوة هنا في المغرب، إلى أين يتجه المغرب؟ وأعتقد الآن هذا نقاش مهم. أعتقد المغرب الآن في مرحلة تأسيس أغورا لمن لا يعرفها، هي تعبير إغريقي قديم يشير إلى كيف كان الناس يجتمعون في الشارع العام ويتناقشون حول القضايا السياسية، القضايا الاقتصادية ومعاناة. لنفترض أننا الآن في مرحلة معاصرة من هذه الأغورا المغربية المصغرة. دعوني باسمكم وباسم المعهد أن نرحب بثلاث سيدات لهن منطلقات مختلفة في التفكير والتحليل، ولهن أيضا رؤى جديدة يمكن أن تساهم في تسليط مزيد من الضوء على قضية الثقة أو عدم الثقة، وأيضا إلى أين تتجه العلاقة بين الدولة والمجتمع. معنا كاتيا برادة، ولا أريد أن أقرأ السيرة الذاتية أعتقد لديكم، فأركز على عنوانها: التغييرات المؤسسية منظور عضوي. وأعتقد هذا كناية عن اهتمامها أيضا بما هو بنيوي structural، وأيضا ما هو شخصي أو مجتمعي، بمعنى بين البنية والفرد. معنا أيضا أنا جاكوبس، واهتمامها حول محور الشعب والاحتجاج والبرلمانات، التحديات والفرص المتاحة لتمكين المؤسسات الديمقراطية في المغرب. وأيضا هذا طبعا له جانب قوي أو مرتبط عضويا بالمؤسسة السياسية. عندما نتحدث عن البرلمان نتحدث عن الاحتجاج، نتحدث عن كل المؤسسات العامة التي ترفع شعار أنها تعمل من أجل إرساء ديمقراطية مغربية. دعوني أرحب أيضا بإنغريد هايدماير إشغالي، وأتمنى أنني أنطق hope I pronounce the name correctly. تسمعون منها؟ أوكي، هي قالت هذا الاسم. الموضوع هو الثقة السياسية والابتعاد عن التسييس والمواطنة. أعتقد التسييس والمواطنة محوران أساسيان في فهم علاقة جدلية قوية. دعوني أتوقف الآن وأتنازل عن دوري كمدير لهذه الجلسة. حسب تصميم الهيئة التنظيمية للندوة لدينا 90 دقيقة، ساعة ونصف. وأنا أؤمن دائما في كل الندوات والمؤتمرات أن أفضل ما تعطيه الندوة أو الجلسة، وأنا أشيد بدور كل المساهمين كمن يتحدث هنا، لكن القيمة الحقيقية عندما نتفاعل ذهنيا وفكريا في المرحلة الثانية. فأنا حريص على التفاعل النهائي، لذلك أقترح أن نخصص ربع ساعة لكل متحدثة، مجموع 45، ونوظف 45 دقيقة التالية. وأرجوكم ساعدوني في نجاح هذه الجلسة. دعنا من الأسئلة التجريدية، دعونا من أنا هنا أتحدث شوفوني، خلونا في اللحظة اللي تشتغل فيها النورونات، بمعنى اللايت بالب، بمعنى هذه اللحظات اللي فيها تفاعل حقيقي. فأرجو أن نتفق، وأعتقد أن سي محمد مصباح وكل فريق المعهد سوف يكونون سعداء بهذه يعني اللاندين، يعني هذه الهبطة بطريقة راقية. اوكي، باختصار من who would like to start first ladies؟ اوكي، اذا من اقصى اليمين انا جيكوبز، وموضوع الشعب، الاحتجاج والبرلمانات، التحديات والفرص المتاحه لتمكين المؤسسات الديمقراطيه في المغرب ومن ابتسامتها اؤمن واثق فيها. 15 دقيقه.
Thank you so much. This has been so wonderful. I've learned so much. I also want to try and speak as slowly as possible, but within the time frame, of course, mostly because of the translators. I know that they've been working very, very hard, so thank you as well. Okay, so first of all, I'm currently working in the policy realm a bit more now. So that's kind of the focus of my presentation. I'm also looking a little bit less at the issue of trust and more intrigued by institutions in Morocco, and specific political ones, public, civil society, and then also kind of the institution of protest. Okay. Excuse me. I'm going to say something that I think that we all know, but I just want to be clear that this is an assumption that I'm making as I look at these other things also. So, as we all know, I think the strongest political institution in the Moroccan system is the monarchy, and is the power structures that support it. While my aim here is not to go into the economic and political dynamics behind the monarchy, I think it's important to start any presentation on political and economic institutions in the country by starting with this awareness, because the monarchy and the red lines and freedom of expression shape, both directly and indirectly, the rules of the Moroccan political system as an institution, as well as the institutions working within it. The palace remains the key power holder and decision maker in Morocco, and the parliament is still considered a secondary and pretty weak institution. However, I will be discussing 3 different institutions that I believe are necessary for Morocco to thrive, meaning for more Moroccans to have more of a say in the political system through a process of genuine democratization. One of the key problems is the lack of avenues or shrinking avenues for expressing political opposition, concerns, and socioeconomic challenges. People of all socioeconomic backgrounds protest because they feel they don't have many options. One of the lawyers defending the Hirak activists said that at least 1,200 Hirak protesters have been arrested since 2017, and about 1/3 have been charged simply for expressing their support of the movement on social networks. The cultural association Racine was recently closed down. Journalists and newspapers are increasingly targeted, and the media has become very weak, let's say. Human rights organizations have told me that they haven't seen this level of political prisoners since the 1980s. Some argue that Morocco is not moving forward in terms of democracy and human rights, but rather going backwards. This is these are parts of the challenges that Morocco is facing now. And I think connecting the institutions of peaceful protest, civil society, and parliament is the most important way forward in terms of advancing Morocco's democratization process. People need to be heard and feel that they are heard. The country maintains major democratic institutions and a strong history of protests and civil society activism, and it has had a multi-party system throughout the post-independence period. The institutions are here, and it's my aim to analyze the ones that I think have demonstrated the most potential and offer potential zones of autonomous power, avenues for criticism and opposition, and access to people. So for some reason, I'm sorry to cause any technical problems, but yes. All right, cool. I guess I can go without the screen. So sorry. So I'll just kind of keep going. So some of the key questions that I have are, what institutions offer the greatest potential for cultivating democratic practices? Which institutions are independent and which are not? Are there any here? Which institutions are the most effective for promoting political platforms, opposition, and real change? And then obviously we've talked a lot on the question of which institutions do people trust. My sort of hypothesis, as I've kind of said, thank you so much. Thank you. As you can kind of see up here, is essentially the palace remains the key power holder and decision maker in Morocco, as I said, and the parliament is still considered a secondary and relatively weak institution. However, Morocco has a long-term interest in empowering institutions like the parliament, like civil society actors, and the practice of peaceful protest. If the country wants to successfully create an institutional process or to cultivate an institutional process where citizens feel that they can lobby and influence policymakers, this is really the key issue. However, I do think that there is a general lack of trust in these areas, and I think there's actually more trust. Obviously, it depends on how we conceive of trust, but I think generally speaking, there's more trust actually in the institution of the monarchy. So this is an important point, I think. How much time do I have left?
I think another 7 minutes.
Okay, great. Okay, sorry. So I'm going to skip around a little bit because I know that we're tight on time and you all have been here for a long, long time, which is wonderful. So these are sort of, I'm thinking through, this is kind of a new project for me. I lived in Morocco for about 8 years and worked here and studied a lot here and did a lot of research, but this is something that is, I think is really necessary, but it's something that I'm just now sort of starting to really look at. So some of these questions that I have is obviously, what do we mean by institutions? How do we evaluate their roles in the political system and their power? There are various sort of notions of it, as you can kind of see here. And I'm going to be looking at sort of 3 types that I think really matter in the current context. So yes, the 3 different types that I believe offer examples of institutions as frameworks for cooperation that have attempted to cultivate or have cultivated democratic practices in Morocco. Some even have very well-known reputations as independent, serious opposition actors. It does not mean that they do not all essentially follow the institutional rules of the Moroccan political framework, but they have demonstrated some creative ways of cultivating cooperation in a system that's kind of rooted in a very conflictual context. So the 3 that I'm looking at are parliament as kind of a formal public political institution. I'm also, the one I'm perhaps even most interested in at the moment is the Moroccan Association of Human Rights. As a civil society institution, but I think is a very unique one in the Moroccan context. And it has gotten this reputation as obviously, it's the largest human rights organization here, and it tends to be the most critical one. So I'm viewing them in some ways as sort of an opposition actor. And then obviously the use of peaceful protest. Okay, I'm going to go relatively quickly here. In terms of the parliament, as I said, I view the parliament as the least independent and most co-opted institution on my list. While I think its list of weaknesses is long, it is a key institution in the country and a major setting for the country's economic and political elite. I think it's very important to emphasize that Morocco has a long and unique history of multi-party politics and the presence of parliament throughout the post-independent state. There is, of course, much scholarship on how the multi-party system has allowed the monarchy to keep major political actors sort of weak, but that's sort of another issue. Nonetheless, I do believe that the parliament is a major source of legitimacy for Morocco's constitutional monarchy, and there are plenty of active political parties that run in elections. I think some important points, I mean, we've talked a lot about the 2011 Constitution. Also, I think the shift from a unicameral to a bicameral legislature in 1996 was also, I think, a necessary move and was helpful. So there are definitely areas of potential and positivity. I think one of the big issues is actually within political parties itself and sort of the cleavages that divide political parties here. It's less focused on sort of the ideology and specific platforms. You'll actually see a lot of similarities on like economic platforms among the major parties, but it's the cleavage in political parties is very often proximity to the palace. So you obviously have sort of well-known pro-palace parties such as RNI. So Mr. Ahmouche has kind of, he's been well-known for a while, but his sort of entry into RNI, I thought, said a lot about the results of the 2016 elections and how long it took for the coalition to happen, I also think is very, very telling. So parliament and political parties are important. Got it. Okay. But the party system is institutionally weak and people do not have much trust in it. But like I said, I do think that there is potential, and I think that there is a parliamentary culture, and I think that that is necessary, and I think that it is helpful. So I'm not just trying to say that Parliament is terrible. I think it plays an important role, and I think there are actually very key policy areas where Parliament could be more active, and I hope to see that. So I don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to kind of roll through and probably focus a little bit now on the Moroccan Association of Human Rights. The big thing for me is, these numbers kind of blew me away. Over 90 offices throughout the country. When I was here doing research, every time I traveled anywhere, I would look them up because they were everywhere and they knew very often what was happening. And then you have a membership of, around 12,000, making it not just the largest human rights organization really in Morocco, but in the whole MENA region. So they have huge outreach, and they are known to be more critical. And I think that they play an essential role here, and that I know that they've had some issues since 2014, and I just think that the regime and parliament needs to cultivate them as an institution as much as possible, because I think that they are providing an essential role in Moroccan politics. And then the institution of peaceful protest kind of is a bit self-explanatory. What struck me was obviously the increasingly creative strategies for protest. The boycott is obviously the most well-known one. Recently, that was extremely popular. I think it did extremely well, and I expect to see more of that in the future, which again, I think is very positive. And I think, again, the institution of peaceful protest should be cultivated. People need avenues to express criticism and issues, and I just think that that's healthy, obviously. So basically, I'm done. But kind of a summary of, there's a host of challenges, but I want to really stress that there are a host of opportunities. Morocco does have a parliament that is active, even if it is limited. For me, one of the most interesting actors here is the Moroccan Association of Human Rights. Not just, I mean, in some ways it's larger and more active than most political parties here, which I think says a lot. And I think I'm a bit worried because they've been having more and more problems. And I really hope that that will change, because again, I think that they are essential to Morocco. I think that they play a crucial role, and they will continue to. So that's basically it.
Thank you very much. Have you seen how my trust is? Okay. أعتقد أن قد لمست نقطة أساسية، وأننا لا نتحدث عن مؤسسات أو أطراف أو بنايات أو أسماء بقدر ما نبحث عن العلائقية what is relational بين البرلمان، بين الملكية، بين الفاعلين السياسيين، بين المجتمع. فدعونا مع هذه الحركية، هذا الديناميزم، وأعتقد هو هذا لب الموضوع، سواء تحدثنا عن ثقة أو تآكل الثقة أو انعدام الثقة أو رأس المال السياسي أو الاجتماعي وما إلى ذلك، بمعنى أننا نتحدث عن مجموعة من المتغيرات، وعندما تتلاقى تتغير أيضا حركية لا متناهية. بنفس المنطق الآن، وأعتقد هذا هو المدخل للموضوع الثاني، إنجريد تهتم بالثقة السياسية والابتعاد عن التسييس والمواطنة، وهنا نحن أيضا أمام فرضية الثقة، بمعنى كيف يصنع الشخص ويطور ويبلور هذه الثقة في البنية السياسية والاقتصادية، أو كيف ربما البنية السياسية هي ما تدفعه إلى بعض الاعتقادات أو بعض النمطية في تكريس خطاب وسرديات، وبالتالي انطباع غير عضوي غير طبيعي، يصبح تركيب أو هندسة تلك الثقة. باختصار، إنجريد وموضوع الثقة السياسية والابتعاد عن التسييس والمواطنة، وهي متسيسة لكنها ذات مبادئ. ربع ساعة.
I would change the title a little bit, that was mentioned in the program. I think it's better depoliticization and active citizenship in transitional countries. And it would be more of theoretical nature and less Okay. So that several years after the Arab Spring, and despite the vast political efforts, the decision makers could not repair the breach between state and citizens in the Arab world. Moreover, the small and regular upheavals, no vote turnout, and high political distrust, especially from young people, and also.
Okay. Otherwise, it doesn't pick up, and the interpreters will struggle.
Okay.
Unless if you, the board, if they can push the mic a little bit higher.
And also general dissatisfaction with public governance illustrates still existing tensions between state and people. So the lack of citizens and trust in political institutions may result out, and also the public institutions trust in citizens may result out of depoliticization and technocratization of public policy making. So depoliticization has various understandings. First, it refers to the depoliticization of policy fields and the shifting weight given to non-political issues, or the removal from certain issues from the political debate. That this was Maghrabi. He calls depoliticization is the outcome of liberal reforms which have worked against democracy.
Ingrid, do me a favor. The interpreters are beginning. Just take your time, slower pace, and don't set up, because otherwise you will knock the glass. Let's take it.
Okay, Maghrabi, he understands depoliticization as the marginalization of the question of legitimacy and also of sovereignty, and that political primacy is given to economic issues. Depolitization refers also to limited participation possibilities in public policy making. So there are specific groups and also citizens are excluded from participation to public institutions, which is also strongly linked to the question of legitimacy. So this people participating in 2011 uprisings were to a certain degree depoliticized, in the sense they have been largely unwilling and uninterested in participating in institutional policies through traditional actors such as political parties or long-standing civil society organizations, which does not mean that they have not been involved in other politicized activities outside of mainstream institutions. So in case of Morocco, Cavador, he speaks from depolitization through technocracy. This concept understands depolitization as the result of a process where decision-making appears to be removed both from elected institutions and the real center of power. So through technocratization, complex issues and policies that are deemed to be too complex for ordinary people to understand are removed from partisan and political debate. Naturally, technocrats will identify possible ways to proceed so people remain effectively depoliticized and excluded from participation. As governing follows the logic of technocratic depoliticized rather than political choices. In Morocco, technocracy was already very strongly present under the rule of Hassan II and enabled the regime to ensure stability. Even though Morocco experienced a process of repoliticization of power and the time period of technocracy during the period of alternance, also in today's government formation, we count several technocrats in key positions in important policy areas. So, however, rational decision-making by technocrats guarantees to a certain degree the governability of public affairs. In contrast, we can argue also that participatory mechanisms may risk to lead to depolitization because the decisions maker may exploit the citizens and civil society's participation for legitimizing already formulated or taken decisions by the state. So as we know, process of state building and including legitimacy and development of institutions strongly relies on strong state-society relations. So scholarship widely considers civic trust, as I think it was mentioned already today a lot, and legitimacy of the state is central to the functioning of state and sustainability of peace. So to build a political community and civil society, it is necessary to build some kind of trust and confidence, not only in others, but also in terms of shared norms and values, and also in states and institutions. I think the dimensions of trust were already mentioned today. So we have, like, first, the citizens' trust in other fellow citizens, so the citizens' confidence in the social community, which is broadly referred to as civic trust or social trust, and then the citizens' trust in elites and institution-based trust, what is referred to as political trust. But also two other forms of trust which are deemed very important is the political elites' trust in other elites, and also the political elite trust and administration's trust in citizens. So this shows that trust might run in different directions. So besides trust in government and institutions, trust of government in citizens and civil society organizations, and trust within government institutions also affect policy design and outcome. So especially in trusting NGOs and civil society organizations with the performance of social services and public duties indicates that the administration has trust in citizens. Citizens that will not trust public administrators, if they know or feel that public officials do not trust them, will certainly not have a lot of trust in public institutions. And also public administrators, they are not likely to proactively implement trust-enhancing reform policies. They will not trust citizens. So considering citizens as major individuals is necessary in order citizens' participation is actively taken in consideration in public policy making. Administrators' negative attitude towards citizens hinders effective participation of citizens. So greater trust in citizens leads to a greater willingness of the political elite to involve citizens. Additionally, if the state entrusts civil society organizations with providing social services and public duties, there will be mutual benefits for both of them. However, technocratic approaches consider citizens as rather incompetent in public decision making. So they assume that citizens do not have enough specific knowledge and expertise, and which increases the unwillingness to involve citizens in decision making. So as participation is a major right and duty of citizenship, I want to focus now further on citizenship. There are also two different concepts of citizenship. First, the citizenship, which was elaborated with the emergence of nation states. So it is considered as a legal status, and makes citizens aware of the affiliation to a nation state. I think this was in Arabic muwattana. It's also referred to the nation. The others, I think, know much better. So, citizens are thus full formal members of a nation state and benefit from the distinctive welfare rights, and which is also referred to as a state citizenship. So the question of membership and belonging gains very much importance when it comes, for example, to the integration of immigrants. As we've now in Europe a lot of debates on social welfare, which is granted in connection with citizenship. So public debates a lot around citizen state membership and the inclusion and exclusion of citizens. So granting state citizenship is then a process of inclusion and exclusion, or the defining process between natives and foreigners. And second, we have democratic citizenship, which is defined through the shared membership of a political community. So citizens are thus political actors and constitute political spaces. Also, over the time, citizenship becomes institutionalized and is and cannot be separated from this understanding of state for the modern state concept. So they rely inevitably upon each other. So citizenship defines the respective rights and duties of both state and citizen. This assumes that the state guarantees citizens' rights of participation and provides adequate participation mechanisms, as well as the fact that citizens accomplish their civic duties and responsibility in the sense of effective citizenship. So democratic citizenship is, however, a very contested concept from the state as well as civil society. However, there are both the civil society and democratic citizenship have two different forms of participation. So whereas civil society is a semi-public form of participation that intermediates between the public and the private sphere, it is considered as a system of self-organized intermediary groups. So they're independent from the public authorities and private units and take collective actions to defend and promote their own interests. But they do not seek to replace public agents and private actors and act within the pre-established rules of civil or legal nature. Active citizenship, however, embraces citizens' rights as well as their duties and responsibilities. So taking part in political life is thus considered not only as a right, but also as a moral duty. Active citizenship is closely linked to the notion of the nation state, as the state is responsible to ensure the rights to enforce active citizenship. And inactive citizenship, on the other hand, refers to citizens which concentrate on rather private issues to the detriment of the public and political identities. So this can be either to the legal conditions of the regime in which they are acting, otherwise also to the people's political disinterest due to depoliticization. So citizenship is then limited to holding passports and obeying laws, while active political participation only refers to voting during election periods. So in contrast to state citizenship as a status, which relies on hierarchy and dependency between the state and its members, democratic citizenship enables the establishment of political communities as the outcome of citizen practice. So democratic citizenship does enable citizens' public engagement for political activities. So based on the fact that citizenship entails civil rights as well as civil duties, for example, the compulsory military service is an example for responsibilities inherent to citizenship. Especially communal services constitute a tool to create a sense of solidarity and community among citizens regardless of social classes. This is what we could consider in the last months, where there was public debate on the reintroduction of military service in Morocco, which is also some kind of creating more community sense among citizens, especially young men. And social media also introduced a new dimension to active citizenship, that through online commitments or clickism, citizens engage in public debates according to their virtual belonging to a political community. Also they support online initiatives and petitions via social media, and this gives also the impression that they assume the civic duties just by adding a like or just by committing. Shall I conclude now?
If you like 2 minutes, would be nice.
Okay. Yeah, okay. We'll leave something out, but to conclude that, especially within democratization processes, the consolidation of public institutions, it requires mutual building of trust. So, as I mentioned before, first the citizens' political trust in public institutions and the government's responsibility in effective governance, and also the institutions' trust in citizens and civil society organizations. So trust of the political elites in citizens increases also the willingness to involve citizens, and hence also the citizens' trust in their political elites. So as I argued, the lack of trust may result out of depoliticization of citizens and also of technocratization of public policy making. And as trust is whether emotional than a rational form of relationship between individuals and institutions, it requires therefore effective interaction and also proximity and dialogue in order that citizens' trust in public institutions and vice versa can be increased.
Thank you very much. رئيس جلسة لا يعرف أين تجلس كافية وأين تجلس نادية. هو في الصباح يقر أمامكم أنه يعاني من انفصام الشخصية وسكيزوفرينيك وما تقول. إذا سيرنا هذا المنطق يصبح عنوان هذه الجلسة اللا معقول في إدارة الجلسات وخاتمة الشطحات. طيب هذا من باب النقد الذاتي. الآن أعتقد أن ما قدمته آن جيكوب وإنجريد من خلال تركيزهما على الديناميات ما يتحرك بين هذه المؤسسات وكيف يتبلور شكل وحجم ومستوى ارتفاع أو انخفاض الثقة في المؤسسات في الاتجاهين، ما يتولد لدى المواطنين وأيضا ما تحاول أن تروج له مؤسسات الحكم أو المؤسسات البنيوية السياسية والاقتصادية وما ذلك. هذا أعتقد يساعدنا الآن في الوصول إلى مرحلة أخرى كيف يمكن أن نركز أكثر let's zoom in more على التغييرات المؤسسية، بمعنى كيف ينعكس هذا مستوى الثقة ومستوى رأس المال السياسي على المؤسسات من داخلها، بمعنى كيف يمكن أن نستحضر أنفسنا داخل أي هذه المؤسسات. هل هناك فعلا تغيير عضوي أورجانيك أو تغيير from within كما يقولون؟ إذن كاتية برادة ربع ساعة والله يكون في عنكم لأنكم عارف شوية.
Well, and Ingrid strict respect for time puts more pressure on me, and I will be trying to control for my Moroccan nonchalance and try to finish within the 15 minutes. I want you to conceive of my presentation as some kind of a little talk between two parties. The first party is a concrete case of institutional change, and the other party is more of the underlying conceptual / theoretical framework with no dichotomy between both, but rather a frank conversation.
So my first stop would be in the former Soviet Union. My name is Katya, so it should be clear that at some point in time I will be speaking about Russia, and doing it earlier and sooner is better. So the first step is that we are on the 90s and we are living, the world was living a real momentum. Thousands and hundreds of thousands of people took it to the streets in different countries of the former Soviet Union in what resembles somehow the uprisal 2 decades later in the Arab world, in the Arab Spring. People were demanding more change, so you have guessed it by now, I'm referring to the collapse of the former Soviet Union, which materialized by the fall of the Berlin Wall, the resignation of President Gorbachev and his replacement by President Boris Yeltsin. More symbolically, but more significantly for the Russian, the replacement of the old USSR flag, the one that maybe you are too young to remember, with the hammer and the sickle over the Kremlin, with the new Russian Federation flag, which is now over the Kremlin. That was more symbolic for the world, but very significant to the Russian. So why am I speaking about that? Because I consider, and most of the researchers studying institutional change consider that the collapse of the former Soviet Union as an important gold mine for people who are trying to understand how do we get from one institutional configuration to the other. Because now, after all the presentation, I think it's a no-brainer that we understand the role of institutions, that are important for economic growth, they are important building block for democracy and for sustaining a vibrant democracy. But how do we get from one institutional framework to the other? With the prudence of the researcher, I am telling you I would not be providing any answer to this question, but rather make sure that you understand the complexity of the question. So what we have after the collapse of the former Soviet Union is the rapid, very rapid destruction of the institution which supported the socialist or the communist regime. And the building of a new institution was a much more longer and complex process. But importantly, and more importantly for me, is that it's a process with different variation from one country to the other, the countries that formerly constituted the Soviet Union. Just to give you an idea of those variations, so we have between the countries that constitute the former Soviet Union in 1992, the GDP per capita variation was between $500 per capita to something like $8,000. And a decade later, the same variation in those countries went for $400 to $12,000. So that tells you how huge is the variation. Something more significant is that a country like Poland, for example, saw an increase in its GDP by capita for the same period, meaning 1 decade after the transition, by 62% increase in GDP per capita, while neighboring Ukraine saw a shrink on its GDP per capita by 63%. So that tells you the variation in the history. So from one side, you have countries from the former Soviet Union, who were able to engage in institutional reform, to adopt institutions which were more compatible with market economy, with democratization. And you have the other bloc, which was more trapped in reform, despite the initial impetus for reforms. Those countries would be like Pakistan, Russia, and Ukraine itself. So now the question is how we start from the initial situation, which is kind of similar. You have the collapse of a former communist regime in all of those countries, and we end up in a situation that is quite different. I'm not saying that the countries from the former Soviet Union, which joined the European Union, are really the perfect state. There are some setbacks, but they are still doing better than others. What explains these differences? And here where the second part of the conversation of my presentation steps in, which is the theory. What does the theory tell us? And there we have something rather provocative that would come from economist Douglas North, who would say that institutions are not created to be socially efficient, but are there to represent the interest of the group with the bigger bargaining power to change the rules of the game. That's what institutions are created for. How does it what does it tell us for the concrete case of the former Soviet Union? So we are starting with the situation in those different countries where it is safe to assume that the political elite or the nomenclatura had preserved some kind of initial political power, at least at the very beginning of the transition. However, this political power would vary from one country to another, and this can be justified by the level of political entrenchment. The level of political entrenchment would be something we can understand in terms of the number of years spent under the communist regime. So in a country like in Russia, where the Communist Party was there longer than a country like Poland, we can assume that the Communist Party was able to destroy civil society structure, forms of popular solidarity, faith groups, and other political parties that could emerge and challenge the political regime, while other countries would, a contrario, have preserved, despite the communist regime, but under shorter period, preserve some kind of mobilization, which initially, during the first phase of the transition, could constitute some political challengers to the nomenclatura. However, this element of political entrenchment by itself does not explain or is not sufficient to explain why some country moved toward institutional building, better institutional framework, while other countries of the former Soviet Union were not able to do so. The other element which is important and which comes from a study from the Massachusetts University was the level of natural endowment. So the more a country is rich in terms of oil and gas, the less incentive would the political elite, the nomenclatura, the new entrants or the oligarchs have to change the games of the rule, because they are materializing a very short-term profit from the status quo. Why would they invest in better institutional framework that would preserve a property right? That does not make any kind of sense for them. So they are happy with the status quo, they are happy with the weak institutional framework that enable them to materialize as much profit as possible from the situation. So to make the story short, what makes a difference in understanding the behavior of the political elite from one country to another of the former Soviet Union would be the level of the political entrenchment coupled with the natural endowment. So that would determine if the behavior of the political elite would be a catalytic one, catalytic in a sense that it is helping for the building of institution, or would it be more of an extractive one in a sense that it tries to maximize the profits rather than to help in any institutional building. The first one would be called in economics an invisible hand versus a grubby hand. So now if we leave for a moment the comfort zone of the material, concrete example, and we go to the discomfort, but the excitement and the challenges of the theory, and try to understand beyond this case of the former Soviet Union, what explains and how do we explain institutional changes. First of all, as a disclaimer, as an economist myself, when I refer to institutional framework, I am being very minimalistic in a sense that I refer to two important elements, which are property rights and law enforcement. Property rights coupled with law enforcement is in economics what would guarantee some kind of innovation, risk-taking, investment in intangible as well as tangible assets. So we have different theories that would explain institutional changes, but I decided to focus on two major ones. The first one is the collective choice theory of institutional change. What does it assert? It asserts that institutional changes are a collective process, a centralized process with a political entity, let's say it can be the state, it can be the community, having an implicit kind of rule, explicit rules. You, me, and other parties are engaging in bargaining activities, in conflicts, in whatever sort of other actions, collective actions that we can have to alter and to change the rules of the game vis-a-vis this political political authority. And what happened then is a phenomena called by economist Gray Lipkop contracting. So we go into really bargaining and trying to change the rules of the game. Who is successful depends on the coalition, on the building a coalition. So if you are able to build a coalition, then chances are that you may be changing the rules of the game and changing the institutional framework. Here again, what constitutes a coalition would be different from one country to another. A coalition in a democracy would require a majority. A coalition in a dictatorship may be just a winning coalition of the dictator himself. So that's complication would be called in economic science or in social science generally some kind of path dependency, because history and how the rules of the games are set historically do matters. Eleanor Ostrom would add further complication by saying that if the winning parties in any kind of institutional change are not able to compensate the loser may block this institutional change, and that's what sometimes explains why some inefficient institutions continue to be there. So another element that adds complication to this institutional changes is the concept of bounded rationality. So what do we know as economic agents is very limited. We are not sure that voting for a specific law, for a specific parties would really ensure the institutional changes and how those institutional changes would benefit us. So that's the collective choice theory of institution versus which we have the more evolutionary theory of institutional changes, which assumes something completely different. It's a different position. We have a centralized in the first hand versus in the evolutionary theory, a completely decentralized and uncoordinated institutional change that happens according to someone like Hayek, who would really belong to this school, in a very spontaneous order manner. So the good institution, the efficient institution will survive and the inefficient one will die out. That's why it is evolutionary in more of a Darwinian sense of being evolutionary. So now, how do we reconcile both parts, the evolutionary one versus the more collective choice theory one? And then I started with Douglas North and maybe almost finishing with Douglas North, who proposes that the collective choice theory of institution is better suited to explain how formal institution changes, while the spontaneous or the more evolutionary theory of institutional change is more applicable in the case of informal institutions that are the morals and the norms and their opinion, the kind of institution. So maybe before finishing, I just want to leave you with the thought, not a conclusion. And this thought would be referring you to two major historical figures. The first one would be Turgot. Turgot was a minister under Louis XVI, and he proposed a number of reforms. Those reforms, by the past standard and even by our day standard, may seem very liberal, but then it was too late for the implementation of those kind of reforms because the pressure along the fracture line were so high. The other figure closer to whom maybe is Khertin Pasha, which is referred to quite often also as Khairuddin al-Tunisi, who really wanted, as a Grand Vizier of King Sultan Abdel Majid, wanted to engage in a series of reform, but then again it was too late. The Ottoman Empire was already suffering from all the exogenous shocks of a better organized Western forces. So that's to leave you with the thought that maybe it is very hard today to talk about how institutional changes happen, but we can see and say with the certitude of the past that if institutional changes are not implemented at the right time, they will not happen in a gradual way, but rather happen in an earthquake manner. Thank you.
As a quick reflection, a majority of 3 ladies and a minority of 1 male moderator, and we don't have a conflict. That makes me believe if we have more female leaders, we will have more trust, more justice, more equality. Let's vote for ladies. Okay, الآن أنتم مدعوون كجمهور وكقاعة وأيضا المنصة ومن فيها لتحقيق القيمة الحقيقية المضافة لهذه الجلسة. أقترح 3 أسئلة أو 3 تأملات دقيقة واحدة أو ما أقل، ثم نعود للمنصة ونعود إليكم بسرعة.
شكرا على تنظيم هذه الندوة. استفدت كثيرا من الكلام الذي قيل، ولكي لا أطيل لدي سؤال. الثقة في المؤسسات، مفهوم الثقة في المؤسسات، لماذا لا نطرح ثقة في قيمة المؤسسات أصلا في مثلا في الغرب؟ الآن احتجاجات السترات الصفراء، احتجاجات في بلجيكا، عنف على المتظاهرين، قمع بالنسبة للمتظاهرين، اعتقالات بالجملة، بل عنف يفوق العنف الذي يمارس هنا. هل بإمكاننا القول بأن الديمقراطية بمفهومها الغربي الآن، وأنا لا أعادي مجرد تأمل، هل بإمكان القول بأن الديمقراطية بمفهومها الغربي الآن يعني في مرحلة التسعينيات التي تحدثت عنها الأستاذة، يعني في أهبة الانهيار؟ وشكرا.
سؤالي هو أنكم تحدثتم عن الملكية خاصة، تحدثتم كذلك عن الثروات. كاين هناك أشياء ربما العدم الحديث عنها، وهو الريع الاقتصادي في غياب يعني إرادة سياسية. وهذا هو السؤال الذي أريد، في غياب إرادة سياسية، في غياب تكوين العنصر البشري، وهذا هو في الحقيقة مربط الفرس. أنا أسأل لأن هناك من يراهن، والجميع يقول أن المغرب لا يمكن أن يعيش بدون ملكية. ما هو تعليقك مع ذلك؟
I was really interpreted by the first speaker, by the presentation of the first speaker, Anna Jacobs. I like the way you have addressed the notion, your radical understanding or radical questioning of the notion of institution. Would it be possible to apply that to the second concept, that is the concept of protest? What is a protest? A protest, actually. You might be aware, of course, this is a very brief question. Now, second question to, yeah.
Just do with one question, please.
One question.
Otherwise,
Okay.
Yeah. Let's get the microphone back here.
American, I can definitely talk a little bit about the problems in the West with democratic institutions at the moment. In the U.S., just really quickly, for me, I think one of the biggest problems is the attack on the media in the U.S. That has become a huge issue. And for me, and I think for a lot of people, and I think for a healthy democratic institution, we need an independent media to fact check. And you know, I have a president that just lies literally all day, and very easily writes off the media and the profession and the necessity of investigative, critical journalism. I mean, this is the foundation of our country, and he makes a mockery of it every single day. So I don't have an answer if democracy is on the decline. I am hopeful that the election of Donald Trump it has, I think in a lot of ways, it will elicit an even more radical reaction, which I think is positive. So I hope that will happen. But I think it's definitely true that, I mean, I can speak for, I think, a lot of Americans that our confidence is obviously very shaken in our political system, and in kind of understanding, you know, after he was elected, I didn't really know what my country really was anymore and what it represented. I knew that there were always these very negative elements, but I am hopeful that will change. So the other question about the monarchy, I'm absolutely fascinated by the way with the monarchy here as an institution, and I think that there's so much potential for it to play a critical role in the democratization process in this country. My big question is, does the monarchy want that? There's a very powerful system of economic rents. There's a very entrenched system of patronage here, and I think that there's this perception that if you start to inch away at it, the whole thing will collapse. And I don't think that that's true. I think that there's a way to empower Parliament. I think that there is a way to allow more criticism, more opposition, and I think that it will actually make the monarchy more popular, and I think that it will actually help everyone. Yes, it does mean that there will have to be some changes in power, but I think that there is a way to do that. I think the question is there a genuine desire? Is this sort of democratization process just sort of it's just kind of for the image of it? Are there actually institutional changes that are happening that are going to lead towards more power with the Parliament? After 2011, right after, I would say yes. It's looking pretty good. Now I'm a little less optimistic. So I don't know if that answers your question. But,
I was more willing to answer on the Gilets jaunes, and I would like to say that more of the Gilets jaunes is a political kind of movement or protest movement in France, which has been in a linear way very inherent to the French Republic. So I'm not seeing it as something very new. I mean, before les Gilets jaunes, we had les Bolets rouges. Before les Bolets rouges, we had massive protests against the contrat première embauche under Jacques Chirac. So I'm not saying it as something so novel in French history. So, but we sometimes tend to see protest movements in other countries with our own subjectivity from our own country. So that was my intake on just the Gilets jaunes.
Democracy in the West is in decline. Also, the Gilets jaunes manifestations to show that, especially social movements become political parties. It's not the trust in the political party, but also the trust in the governability afterwards. So it's like Katja said before. Also, the institutions, they have to represent some issues and also have to govern. So it's a different topic if it's only the interests, and otherwise afterwards to govern. I think that might be also have to be considered when.
After this panel, Katja can claim a three-way name. Nadia, Katja, Barada. Okay. شيمي أعتقد عندك سؤال ومن بعد الأخت ومن بعد الأخ اللي يلا على السريع.
Just the issue of depoliticization. I think that we need to change maybe the lens through which we look at some aspects of the political life in Morocco and in the MENA region as a whole. I don't think that we can really analyze the lower turnout voter in Morocco, for example, or the decline of political parties as being symptomatic of some kind of depoliticization. I think there are some other forms of doing politics that are trying, in my opinion, and I want to ask you what do you think about this, that are trying to extend the confines of politics beyond the institutions, beyond the traditional institutions entrusted with the task of channeling the people's grievances in the formal politics.
ذكرت أن مؤسسة البرلمان تبقى مؤسسة ثانوية أو أقل استقلالية، مما يؤكد أن المؤسسة لا تقوم بدورها التشريعي. سؤالي كيف يمكن إحياء هذه المؤسسة وتعبئة الشباب من أجل الشباب المثقف من أجل الانخراط في السياسة وتجديد النخب السياسية الموجودة في البرلمان.
You made the focus on Russia, but my question, what is your opinion about the democratic alternation in this country, in Russia?
Okay, so this is such an excellent question, and I have thought a lot about this. The parliament here as well. I think, first of all, I also want to say that there are political parties here. I think they tend to be on the smaller side that are very critical, that are a bit more on the radical side, and are, I think, changing the conversation about what can be criticized. Budgets, for example, for the military, these type of things. I'm thinking specifically of the PSU. And I mean, I know that this is a very modest party at the moment, but their presence was all over social media. I think that they have a bright future. I hope that, and I mean, so that's one thing, that there are small political parties that are doing well, and I think that they're also doing a good job of reaching out to youth. how to get youth more involved. I think it's also political parties, I think, need to invest more in having clearer platforms. For example, when I looked at kind of the economic plans for some of the major parties, they were very similar in a lot of ways. And I think that they need to not shy away so much from taking clearer positions on key issues, youth being one of them. But that means also not being as concerned about criticizing certain things here. So that's one thing. The other thing is the political parties. There are certain ones. I'm thinking specifically. I mean, the Party of Justice and Development is, I think, one of the most interesting ones here because its outreach is so big, and youth is a major part of that. And I think other political parties, to be honest, in terms of strategy, could learn a lot from that. But I think that the most important thing is also making young people feel heard, having specific policy answers for the problems that young people have, which I think a lot of parties don't have. And we can obviously talk more after too, but so those are just kind of a few things.
Thank you for the question, and concentrating on the former Soviet Union is really beyond any chauvinism or nationalistic kind of feeling, but it is an interesting momentum for any researcher really studying institutional change, because you're starting from a situation where you have 20 countries or 24 countries under the communist regime which is collapsing, and then if you are studying institutional change, you get first-hand insight from where it went differently from one country to another country, and why in Poland, for example, as I said, and other countries which joined the EU, you have the development of better institutions rather than the case of Russia, for example. And this is where I'm talking about the organic approach and the line in what are the incentives for the political elite in one country to change the games of the rules. So that's why was the concentration on the former Soviet Union.
Yeah. There was a very interesting slide that you put up there, but the social mistrust and the spike was pretty interesting. It reached up to the 90th percentile, something like that. So I was wondering if there's any empirical studies done about the reasons behind that spike, the huge spike in the social mistrust in Morocco. Especially that it seems like in Morocco, to tie it back to Robert Putnam, on his book, Bowling Alone. We've been bowling alone in this country for so many years. What has contributed to that?
My question is to Anna. Basically, there is, when we're studying parliaments in Morocco and other institutions, there is distinct, and also when studying institutions in authoritarian context in general, there is this thing called democratic bias, right? So why do we necessarily assume that the Moroccan parliament is dysfunctional? Maybe it's doing what it's supposed to. And you mentioned bicameralism. Bicameralism was basically installed as a way of countering any potential.
سؤالي وهو مرتبط بمسألة التسييس التي تحدث عنه الأستاذة. هو هل يمكن الآن أن نتحدث عن تسييس خارج الأحزاب السياسية، بمعنى أننا انتقلنا من مرحلة التسييس من داخل الفكرة بوصفها مرتبطة بأيديولوجية الحزب إلى الممارسة، وبالتالي هل المشاركة السياسية الآن أصبح من المعقول ربطها فقط بالمشاركات المرتبطة بالأحزاب السياسية من جهة وبالانتخابات، بمعنى أن المواطنين الآن أصبحوا أو أنهم لديهم أنماط جديدة للمشاركة السياسية ولممارسة الضغط السياسي من قبل مثلا المقاطعة لجون إلى آخره.
So I am not a native speaker, but you were talking about spike. So I think you were talking about some movement. Right. But what I showed you was nothing in development. It was just a snapshot, which means that what you saw in 2016 is the same in 2006. And probably also in 2000. I mean, I don't have data on 2000, but there are two things that I would like to say. It's social trust is pretty stable, contrary to political trust, which is fluctuating interestingly, in many countries. But social trust is rather a stable entity. And this low level of social trust that we see in Morocco is not an exception. You would find that in many other societies as well. Like, for example, in Brazil, social trust is also at 12%, for example. So it's not, I just presented you Morocco, but I'm pretty sure if I was looking for other countries, it would be pretty much the same.
Okay, let me pass the mic on to, I'm not going to say names.
Yeah, you raised an excellent point. This is the big question: is Parliament here to actually promote democracy, or is it here to actually maintain the political and economic interests in this country? Which, and I go back and forth about this. However, this also makes me think of, in the 1990s, the opening that happened, the elections, the USFP coming to power. There was a level of optimism in the late 90s. And then there was this notion that, well, they basically co-opted the opposition. And I think that this conversation also happened after 2011 with the Party of Justice and Development. I think it's a serious concern, and I think it's a problem, and I think it's likely true. The political system is very tightly controlled and monitored, and an opposition is allowed within reason, and it's a very controlled one. However, it doesn't mean that I don't think that Parliament cannot offer other avenues of opposition, and I think that's starting to slowly happen, or I'm hoping that it is.
And the microphone goes to the lady senator from Illinois.
I would just briefly respond to the question on politicized activities outside of public institutions. That's actually briefly mentioned in the talk. It does not mean if trust in public institution is not there that people are uninterested, that they are not active in politicized activities beyond that. But it's different because public institutions have to show outcomes, and if people and there is civic engagement, they don't have this responsibility towards citizens. They maybe have more trust, but they might not be sanctioned like public institutions. And there is, like you mentioned, there are new forms of political participation, new forms of civic engagement, which does not mean that the outcome, that they probably have gained much more trust because the citizens don't rely on them, so they might be considered different.